when you finally shut out all the noise, your awareness and attention is available to realize you have always been beloved of God. That God has always been in you and you are in God. And it's a recognition of what is already the case.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. You know, we live in a moment obsessed with certainty. Everyone is trying to figure everything out, what's true, what's right, how to fix the world. We assume that if we just had the right knowledge, the right answers, we could finally make sense of things. But what if knowledge isn't the thing that saves us? In this episode, I talk with philosopher and author James K.A. Smith about his new book, Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark. We explore the limits of certainty, the wisdom of the Christian mystics, and why silence, solitude, and unknowing might actually be a path into deeper truth and a connection to the divine, so that we know that we are beloved. And when we know that we are beloved, that changes everything. Jamie shares how a season of depression and spiritual disorientation forced him to confront something difficult, that you can't think your way out of every problem. And that realization opened him up to poetry, art, contemplation, and the ancient spiritual tradition that teaches us how to sit in the dark long enough to discover wonder. This conversation is about letting go of control, learning to pay attention again, and discovering the deep truth at the center of the Christian life, that we are already loved. So join us. Here is my conversation with James K.A. Smith. Jamie, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much.
This is a crazy world that we live in today. It feels like truth is elusive. We're trying to figure out what it looks like, and we can't really grasp a hold of it. Do you think that in this crazy world where we can't really figure it out, is it knowledge that can really save us? Can we figure it out and master it to get the right knowledge to solve our problems?
I think that's our temptation. We imagine that we can think ourselves out of this mess. And I mean, of course, I understand we should be rightly unsettled by misinformation and disinformation and all of the ways that people try to hoodwink us and deceive us. And yet there is another sense in which I think this quest to solve everything with more knowledge, more conceptual mastery, I think is kind of doomed to disappointment. And in some ways, maybe I could put it this way. I think we can idolize knowledge, actually. We can actually turn knowing into an idol in which we now rest all of our confidence that we can figure it out. And I think that's because what we want with knowledge is control. So we're faced with all kinds of unsettling uncertainties, and we don't know what to think or who to believe or what to know. And so we just want to feel secure and we want to feel safe. And we think that knowing the right answers gives us control over this situation. And I think that's doomed to disappointment. I think we need to approach uncertainty differently.
We're going to move into your new book, Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark. So we're into mysticism and what it looks like to go into silence and solitude and figure out how to sit in the dark and then come back out into wonder. But you weren't always at this place of like being really inspired by the mystics to move to this. You, as a philosopher and somebody, knowledge and certainty was really key for you.
Yeah.
So just tell me a little bit of your story as a philosopher.
Yeah.
What was it for you, and what were you trying to do in your life, trying to master even philosophy?
Yeah, it's interesting. My path into my training and profession as a philosopher are fairly inseparable, actually, from my path into religion and Christianity. So I was a kind of relatively late convert to Christian faith, and shortly after kind of sensed this calling, if you will, to philosophy. And in many ways, I think I pursued both of them as ways of securing the truth. I think in both cases I was looking for a security that came from dogmatic clarity. And so, insofar as I was interested in philosophy, I was interested in getting the answers, figuring it out, knowing the truth, and winning the argument. I would also say was part of the story. There was the brash young man who for whom every has just a hammer and everyone else is a nail, and this desire to kind of win the argument. I now look back at my younger self and say, I was clearly after something other than truth. I was looking for security or belonging or something like that. And in that sense, the reason I got into philosophy, I think, was something other than wisdom, you might say. Philosophy is supposed to be perennially, classically, it is the pursuit of wisdom. But I think for me, and I think this is not uncommon for many, especially young professional philosophers, is less about wisdom and it's more about winning. And it's about winning the argument, and it's about showing that you're the smartest person in the room, or however that plays out. And what's kind of sad and ironic is I probably approached Christianity in exactly the same way. And I imagine that being a person of faith meant I had the secret, I had the corner on the truth. And the question is, would I be able to convince and persuade everybody else? And I hit rocky shores in both of these ventures, I would say.
Where did the Rocky Shores come in to play? How did you brush up
Yeah.
against the fact that maybe what you were trying to do was really a cloak to what was underneath the actual things you were pursuing?
I mean, for me, it was honestly a season of really debilitating depression. I found myself in my early and to mid 40s just kind of plunged into a cloud of despair that in a way, I couldn't recognize myself, but I also kind of was alienating everybody around me. And it was just becoming so corrosive to my soul and experience. And the two things that happened were my wife, not so gently, propelled me into counseling and for our sake. And at the same time, she gave me a copy of St. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul. And I still was not in a place at that time to realize how these two things would converge. But I would say my experience of my own depression, I think it's maybe a little bit like the way some people experience confronting their own addiction, which is you realize you're up against something that you can't think your way out of. And that's really sort of an affront to a professional thinker. And in many ways, I think when I first went to counseling and therapy, I thought, oh, I'm going to go here and somebody's going to teach me the answers. And then I'm going to have this knowledge and understanding and I'm going to get a hold of it. And I realized, no, actually, the adventure of this therapeutic adventure was an adventure of letting go. Of realizing you can't think your way out of this. And it was very humbling in that regard, but it was also sort of a portal to something else. So I think I came up against an unplumbable depth, which I experienced in despair, that was ironically, paradoxically, a catalyst for me to kind of realize the limits of philosophy as I knew it, but also maybe open me up to really finally thinking about what wisdom was as opposed to what knowledge was.
I mean, that's interesting. The times in my life where I've tried to figure things out, where I don't know what's going on. I'm pursuing, either a therapist or a spiritual director. A lot of it, I try to think my way out of it. Like, and I know the right things. Like, I just know the right things, but it just doesn't work because I'm thinking. How did you start to move from a place
Mm,
of, oh,
mm,
it's not really about thinking our way out of it,
yeah,
especially for a professional thinker. Like,
yeah.
that's not an easy thing to do. Like, where did that come in?
No, you're asking exactly the right question. I mean, I think there are kind of multiple factors here. The one I would say is in the therapeutic journey, I realized that we weren't trying to solve a puzzle. We were re-narrating a story. And in that sense, part of the work, the soul work that was happening therapeutically was actually getting me to confront a bunch of things that I had kind of buried and locked down in a basement. And therefore I had never adequately narrated into my own identity. So I started to realize that in some ways the therapeutic journey was a re-narration. It was it was restorative because it was restoring who I thought I was. And so in that sense it opened me up to realizing the significance of the imagination and not just the intellect. So to move into that space, and by the way, it turns out philosophers also have a lot of things to say about imagination if you're kind of attuned and you start listening to it. So that starts unpacking something for me. The other thing that happened is, and I talk about this a little bit in Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark, I started reading poetry again. And I remember reading, just being like stopped in my tracks in a bookstore reading a poem by Franz Wright, who's no longer with us, but somehow the poet, in their kind of playful and paradoxical use of language that wasn't didactic and syllogisms, somehow that language both broke open reality for me and pierced me to the marrow and managed to unlock something of my own pain, my own desires, my own hungers, my own hopes. And I think this convergence then of the restoring of the imagination that was happening therapeutically is started to be complemented by things I was experiencing in poetry and literature and the arts. And so, and this, it's the imagination, I think, that was tying those things together.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com. And with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. So opening up the imagination, the arts and poetry, what do I get from your book is that you didn't just jump straight into the mysticism, but
No.
contemporary arts and poetry really helped bridge yourself to that. How did that help? How did the
Yeah.
contemporaries help move you to the place of getting into the mysticism?
Thank you for recognizing that. This is an important part of my experience and kind of the argument of the book, if you will. Yeah, it's right. It's not, I wasn't captivated by the Italian masters or something, like, it wasn't like devotional art that was sort of doing something for me. It was in many ways the difficulty and perplexity and captivation of contemporary arts, poetry, film, painting, sculpture. And I think what was going on is in these forms of contemporary artistic expression, I was meeting a kind of difficulty that was sort of intellectually impenetrable, but imaginatively evocative. Like somehow, I don't know if I'll do a good job of describing this, but you'd be in a gallery, and there would be this, what we would call maybe a very abstract piece of art. It wasn't representing anything. It wasn't picturing anything. It wasn't a picture of a father and a son, and you're like weeping in front. It was more like it would be this painting of just like dark black grooves and streaks on a painting, and somehow it had both allure and violence about it, and there's something like it would just grab hold of me and pull me in, and I would find that I would be before it puzzled, perplexed, curious, wondering, fascinated, unable to sort of say, what does this mean? And yet I was engaged in the experience of being pulled out of myself in a way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's precisely the difficulty and perplexity and allure and paradox of contemporary art. To me, that was like this exercise, for me, the professional thinker, so to speak. It was this exercise in intellectual failure. And that was a good thing. It was a good thing to be invited into an encounter where it wasn't a problem to solve. It wasn't something I was going to walk away and say, it means X. But I was held by it. And in some ways, I was able to be quiet and still in these encounters. And that itself also turned out to be a kind of spiritual plowing of the soul in a way that I think was making me available. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I think it's also moving then from the familiar of something where you don't have to be encountered there or contemplate anything because it's so familiar, into the unfamiliar. And we live in a world where we're encountered by the familiar constantly, and it just doesn't hit us.
Yes.
How do people then like move into the unfamiliar? How do we help ourselves encounter the mystery, the unfamiliar of things, so that we could sit with the unknowing?
By the way, I think that's a really good insight you make. That's true. In some ways, it was finding a thrill in the unfamiliar rather than the secure comfort of the familiar. And it strikes me, when you describe it that way, it strikes me that our world governed by algorithms keeps wanting me to experience things that I know what to do with. If you like this, you'll love this. And because it's just a continuity, whereas what we're talking about is getting pulled into things is like, I don't know what to do with this. How do we get to that place? One is, I don't want to discount the importance of community here. I do think there's a dynamic of putting yourself in conversations and community and relationships and networks where you are going to be pulled into opportunities to be encountered by things that are surprising to you, unsettling to you, that are not familiar. And it's probably not likely that we can do that on our own. We need help. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm always, the artists and poets and novelists that I love, I listen to what they love because I wonder what are they going to introduce me to. The other thing though is, this is where I think there's a bit of a dance and dialectic between these two things, because I think in some ways to feel comfortable with the unfamiliar, you have to increasingly feel centered in a kind of understanding of yourself that is able to endure risk. So, I wonder. This is where I wonder if there isn't just a bit of back and forth between, on the one hand, in my case, it was this kind of therapeutic journey to start, where I start realizing, oh, despite everything, I am loved. Despite everything, I am loved. And in a way, once that story seeped down into my deepest bones, now it comes with an ability to take the risk of enjoying not being in control. That's what we want to get to, right? In some ways, to get to a place where you are comfortable with discomfort, where you realize that this experience of being upended and challenged and encountered by the unfamiliar is actually doing a kind of work in you that you can't even know yet. It's there's a tilling of your soul soil that's happening there. And I think incrementally, little tastes, practice, and finding like letting it be its own reward, not instrumentalizing these things, just saying, oh, this is something good to do. I don't know how tangible we want to get, but somehow, my kids, I have grandchildren now, but when our kids were young, our family just became a family where whenever we're in a new town or new place, we go to the art museum and we just wander. And I do think there's something about creating habits and rhythms and patterns in your life where you're just like, no, I'm going to put myself into uncomfortable places. And you're just like, this is what we do. And that, I think, incubates possibility.
What if art could be the thing that restores our hope? Let the Art Speak About Hope is a 2-day conference for artists, writers, musicians, and makers, gathering April 10th and 11th in Madison, Wisconsin. This year's event features a live concert from jazz musician Ruth Naomi Floyd on Friday evening. On Saturday, hear from the dynamic husband and wife duo, artist and writer Tim and Sherry Lowley. Register now at slbf.org/LTAS. That's slbf.org/LTAS. Let the Art Speak About Hope, April 10th and 11th. God invites us into the hope of redemptive creative work.
You started to encounter the mystics, Meister Eckhart, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and you're reading these things. Who are these mystics that think that getting into the dark and the mystery is a portal into something beautiful and true?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So maybe for listeners for whom these are just unfamiliar characters, it's interesting. A lot of these voices, St. Teresa of Avila, Meister Eckhart, the Cloud of Unknowing, which is this amazing anonymous work from the 1300s. It's interesting. They're sort of like late Middle Ages, early modernity dynamics. Some of these folks are writing at the same time that the Protestant Reformation is happening and unfolding and things like that. And in many ways are kind of a response to that, which is a very heady way of thinking about faith. And the mystics are like, let's consider other options here. What I found, and again, I'm encountering the mystics for the sake of my own soul work, but I can't pretend I'm not a philosopher. And so I get philosophically curious about the mystics. And what the mystics are interested in, it seems to me, across the board, is, and they have experiences to go along with this, they're saying there is a way of experiencing the profound depth and plenitude and infinity and fullness and transcendence of God that actually eludes and transcends all of our theological categories and concepts. This is why the mystics got themselves in trouble sometimes too. I find that also philosophically fascinating. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a way in which they're saying there is a kind of awareness, understanding, intuition. It's hard to know what words to use here that that is other than the usual register that we think of knowledge. You know, true or false, A or B, this or that. You know, this kind of binary register of our usual instrumental reason and thinking and the way we make our way in the world. That there's nothing wrong with. I mean, that flies planes and it makes podcast technology work. But what they would say is that's actually a more elementary mode or level of thinking about God. And so Meister Eckhart, for example, famously says, you know, what you need to consider, what you need to risk is praying to God to rid you of God. And you're like, what is, but what he's saying is, it's almost like you have to kind of hear it in scare quotes. It's like, you know, there is a Godhead beyond the little box God that you carry in your head and that you believe in and that who's been good to you. But it's like up and in, you know, there's something more to that. And I have found it fascinating.
And then, you know, Saint Teresa of Avila really made the work of perfect love, casting out fear. And when we have fear, and I think a lot of things we want to control, we want certainty, so we could eliminate fear, and we believe that
Yes.
knowledge, certitude is going to get rid of fear, right? You know, I've lived in the Middle East. I came back to the United States, and you think of the Middle East when you're surrounded by war and like destruction and things, the people would be fearful constantly. And it's not the same as when I came back to the United States and everybody was afraid. Like there was fear everywhere. It was weird. It was a strange,
interesting. Even though
dynamic.
Those horrors hardly ever reach our soil.
Exactly.
What a paradoxical situation.
So weird. So I think if we move into what Meister Eckhart said is like pray to God to get rid of God, you're actually moving into a place of a deeper level of finding this perfect love.
Yes.
And I find myself, if I'm in the middle of silence and I'm saying perfect love or love, speak to me. That gets at something deeper for me than my conception of God. So how do you think that what they were trying to do, like silence and solitude and moving deeper into silence, gets rid of our conceptions into a deeper thing of the mystery of God?
So what I talk about in the book, and you know, this is me just trying to distill what I think is the common wisdom across these voices, is don't think of mysticism as defined by the ecstatic experience. It sometimes was part of the package, but I just don't think it's actually definitive. I try to talk about mysticism as a path, and therefore a path of journeying and practice. And the way I see this mystical wisdom is you retreat into solitude in order to find stillness and silence. And in that stillness and silence, actually, one of the things that happens is your world is turned upside down. This is the darkness, right? You actually you go through this deeply decentering and upending experience, but that turns out to be the portal to wonder. And that's kind of the path you keep walking. I think, to your question, I think what the mystics commonly attest to is, well, first of all, the reason you're looking for solitude and silence is not to hide from the world. It is, though, to diminish the distractions so that our attention has new focus. So what you're going for, the reason to retreat into solitude is it's not individualistic, it's not escapism, it's saying it's getting to a place where the incessant distractions that fritter away our attention to what is deepest. You know, we spend our attention on the superficial. We ought to capitalize on that attention and giving it to the profound depths of the soul. So that's kind of what you're hoping for, is to get to that place. And then the silence piece is really interesting, right? This is why it's a contemplative tradition. You know, the mystics talk about like how to breathe and how to position your body and what a word that might just help you kind of get to this centered place. And what happens in the silence is it seems like, I think this is the most powerful way to articulate what the mystics say. You don't achieve some new union with God. What happens is when you finally shut out all the noise, your awareness and attention is available to realize you have always been beloved of God, that God has always been in you and you are in God. And it's a recognition of what is already the case. And that, to hear that deep, deep, profound assurance of being beloved. This is why perfect love casts out fear. You have to resist what St. Teresa calls it, all the little reptiles that are sitting around the interior castle trying to drag you away from attending to this deep, deep truth. I love this image. You're trying to shut down that noise and those competing voices to attend to this whisper that is always telling you, you are loved, you are loved, you are loved. And I think that's where the fearlessness comes from. And I think this is why it takes practice to kind of, well, the other thing I'll say, I think Teresa, for example, would say the other thing, we're trying to wean ourselves. Sometimes they use this metaphor of being the weaned child. We're trying to wean ourselves from needing all of the other attention that we get from performing. That to me, I think that's been the real game changer for me in middle life, is realizing, to be liberated from this sense that I have to earn and perform and compete for the attention of everybody else so that I can feel worthy, so that I can feel loved. Teresa saying, first of all, that is doomed to disappointment. Attention is incredibly fickle. Whereas if I can get to this place where I realize that I'm actually loved by the creator of the cosmos, everywhere, always, unconditionally, now I don't have to, I'm weaned from the need to have your approval or you like my post or your attention. And I mean, I guess that's what I'm kind of hoping for, is to live that way.
We could all live that way. Like that what a world that would be. What a world.
What's beautiful, I hope I'm not jumping ahead on what the conversation you want to have, but what's beautiful is both Teresa and John of the Cross then, and actually so does the Cloud of Unknowing and Brother Lawrence, they all emphasize that this is not some sort of spiritual self-absorption, because once you are centered by this deep, profound truth that you can't sort of prove or demonstrate or articulate, you actually, it spills over in compassion, because now I don't need to win your approval. I can just be present to you in your need. And I start to see you the way I am realizing God always sees me. And it spills over into this deep compassion, so that the retreat to solitude is not an aversion to other people. It's actually unlocking and unleashing us to truly be present and care for other people. And I think that would change a lot of the ways that we are with one another in our contemporary environment, where we all feel like, everybody needs to see that I know what I'm supposed to know, or I need to win this argument in this space so that I can feel secure and confident, or that these people will like me. It's like, no, let's let go of all of that.
Well, I'll give you an example. So for the church community that I'm a part of, we're called Nava, which means bring home and make beautiful.
Mm.
And we talk about being beloved children of God all the time. So every time we gather, we're talking about we are the beloved. But
Beautiful.
sometimes just speaking that out isn't enough. Like people don't, they go, okay, I know this intellectually that I am beloved, but I don't know it deep into my bones. It's not like filling me.
Yeah.
So for even a community like this, that's a great step in the right direction, that we're speaking the truth over people that you are beloved. What is that next step for the community of people to get to the knowing deep in our bones belovedness that fills us,
Yeah.
and not just it's here intellectually?
Right. Because the irony is you can't didactically instruct people about their belovedness. It's the same way when we were saying earlier, you can't think your way out of this insecurity and fear. You can't be instructed into, you can't think your way into belovedness, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? I mean, what the mystics testify to is that in cultivating rhythms and practices and rituals of solitude and silence and contemplative listening, and not just listening to somebody else tell me this, but really just dwelling in the silence and getting used to the discomfort of the silence so that you can eventually start to hear what God is saying back to you. I think the irony is that your congregation to live this out also needs to cultivate these personal practice. I haven't thought of it this way before, but I can't contemplate for you. Now, in some ways, my contemplation is for you, right? Because insofar as my contemplation centers me in this truth of my belovedness, it is empowering and enabling me to be available to you. And Teresa says very concretely, when you are hungry, when you are cold, when you are in need. So there's this interesting kind of dialectical relationship between the things that we need to cultivate personally for the sake of our community to live out that belovedness and compassion. I do, although I would be intrigued to hear what I'm sure you are already thinking about this and doing this. It strikes me too that exercises of collaboration and shared experiences of discomfort aren't a bad strategy either. And I can think of that in two ways. Like, for example, I would love it if churches and congregations thought about arts circles where you just come together and you experience weird movies or funky contemporary music or whatever it might be, and it's just like, let's be uncomfortable together. That's a great little, it's just an incremental practice. But I just wouldn't discount to wedding contemplative prayer with works of mercy in which we are pulled out to serve shoulder to shoulder those who are in profound need and vulnerable. And in a sense, that too cultivates our sense of awareness. And there's a kind of spiritual solidarity, I think, that happens in that.
I mean, we could get to that. I mean, you kind of end your book with that.
Yeah.
Like that's
yes.
like, what does it look like as we move from all of this, getting into the dark, going back into attention and wonder? That actually then enlivens us to live in such a way that love is expressed through us,
Yes,
for the sake of the world, and it confronts hate
yes,
and fascism,
exactly.
all the things that we are trying to fight at the moment.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Great.
So what then?
Great.
How is that fight different if it is then love expressed, mercy, instead of like trying to win the argument?
That's great, and I would honestly love to hear how you guys experience this in your community too, because yeah, this is what where I try to land, and again, I think this is where the mystics land. Part of what I'm trying to address is I think some people might have a kind of bumper sticker impression of mysticism as seclusion. Do you know what I mean? Like a retreat from the world, and it would feel like the opposite, for example, of activism. But of course, we have these rich Christian streams of prayer and labor, contemplation and action. And what I'm trying to suggest is that the action for the sake of justice and solidarity and community and love and mercy is best nourished by deep contemplative practices that center us all in our belovedness and an assurance of that we can't ever quite articulate, and that will make our action, activism, labor, and advocacy look different because we're not doing it to win. We're not doing it out of an insecurity to show that we know what the right views are. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just a weird, funky dynamic that can happen where sometimes we get so lost in our action and activism because actually we are still trying to perform to be loved. And I think it's that mode of action is doomed to be unsustainable and disappointment. Whereas if we talk about a kind of action and labor and work of mercy that comes out of our own centeredness, first, we also don't have any illusions that we're in charge or that we are the great accomplishers in this regard. We are, in some ways, we're trying to get caught up in what the Spirit is doing in the world. But it also means we can be kind of fearless because we're not dependent on how people view our virtue in public or something like that, right? And I just think that's there's something deeply liberating about that.
I mean, that's one of the many reasons why I love Jesus is
Yes.
that he is this, that he moves from contemplation into action, but it's nonviolent action of love. But it is so like messy for people and disruptive for the world, and it just encounters all of the evil that is there without the violence that we think that it takes to confront it.
Yes.
And so he's rooted in this contemplative place to be able to do this. I mean, he is also the Son of God, but he is human.
Yes. Yes. Right.
So
right.
Like, how does Jesus show us? Like, what helps us with
this,
Jesus?
and this I think, I mean, you've captured it. I think this is why Howard Thurman is also one of the most important voices in this mystical and contemplative tradition. That Jesus is the Jesus of the disinherited, and what do we see in Jesus? He steals away to prayer, right? And he attends to a quiet and solitude and prayerfulness that cultivates a kind of availability to then upend the tables and challenge people in the temple and to reach out compassionately to the sick and the dying. Exactly that kind of centered action that is growing out of a deep love, which therefore doesn't have to be a form of winning or dominating. In some ways, you're not participating in the culture wars, even as you're fighting against the fruit of the culture wars, because you're not playing that game. It's not a contest of power and domination. It's a presence of witness and solidarity, where you realize, I mean, I think at the heart of mystical and contemplative spirituality is it has to be the picture of sort of the open hand. Do you know what I mean? Because so much of what the mystics are inviting us to in solitude and silence is letting go. Just constantly. Meister Eckhart always talks about what he calls Gelassenheit, this letting go, this letting be. And so you open your hands and you give up control, and you let go of your need to cling to approval and performance. You open your hands and you let go. But the open hand is also how you receive the gift of your belovedness. And what's really interesting for the mystics, this is true in Saint Teresa, Saint John of the Cross. Even our capacity for contemplation is a gift. It's not something we are doing. What you're trying to do is you're getting to this place where you are so stripped of your own self-confidence that there's a kind of nakedness and bareness and an openness and a vulnerability and an open-handedness that to then receive the gift of being able to contemplate. And once you know, then everything is open-handed gift. Now that's how we also act in the world, right? It's what Walter Brueggemann called the liturgy of abundance, right? I don't have to cling to what's scarce. The cosmos is teeming with God's abundance. And now I go out collaborating, sharing, working with those open hands.
All of this, it helps the world, but it also, I think, is going to help retrain our ability to be attentive and to pay attention in this world. We're in an attention economy where everything's vying for our attention constantly. We have reports of film students not being able to sit through a 2-hour movie. And it's just right. It's not novels. It's not like, War and Peace. They can't sit through a 2-hour movie. And so this seems to be a way to start to retrain our ability to pay attention. So for people that are in this spot where we've lost the ability to pay attention for a while, what are steps to get us to this process to be able to pay attention?
Yeah. And I want to, we can express exasperation, but I have deep sympathy and empathy for those young people in the film class, because we made that freaking world. Do you know what I mean? We bequeathed to them that world, and they got raised in it. And so it's not their fault in some ways. I think you're right. I think some ways attention is like a muscle. And so I think we can work our way up. You don't start bench pressing 300 pounds. Well, we're never bench pressing 300 pounds, but you don't start with the heavy weights. You do shorter reps with lower weights. And I think there's something about that in terms of reclaiming our attention. It's interesting when you read the mystics, and also if you just read in sort of contemplative literature more widely. I mean, I will say part of what interests me about the mystical tradition is the way that there are kind of really interesting convergences between Jewish mysticism, Christian mysticism, Islamic mysticism, and then Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhist traditions. And I'm not evacuating the differences between them, but there's interesting kind of overlap about something deeply human and something deeply divine here. And all of them, when you get down to the nitty gritty, they're like, start with a minute or two. Don't think you're going to sit down and have 30 minutes of quiet meditation. Nobody does that. I think one way I would love to see is if in our communal gatherings, we actually gave space and time for people to practice silence a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know enough about your tradition. I come out of the Protestant tradition. It's always so freaking noisy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like incessant chatter. We cannot have silence. And I try to do this in classrooms too, to create collective spaces where we just practice a kind of awkward refocusing of our attention, and you let everybody feel comfortable with the discomfort, and you just sort of start building that muscle. There is something there's something deeply incarnate and embodied about all of this. Like you listen to The Cloud of Unknowing, and he's like, listen to your breath, and when you exhale, just restrict it a little bit. And it's really, really interesting how you just kind of come back into your body as this incarnate creature. And I think to honor that is also a resistance to the evisceration of our embodiment by kind of digitized environments and things. So small steps maybe is the way to start.
That's great. Well, this book, Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark, is fantastic. What
Thank
would
you.
your hope be for this book and for your readers?
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, I would love it if folks found in the book an encouragement to venture into a discovery of their own belovedness. And if they found, I would love it too if they found the arts experience of art reframed for them in such a way that the arts are like a spiritual portal and path into what turns out to be really, really significant spiritual disciplines and practices. I think that's the imagination piece of it. So I hope the book will be a sort of fellow pilgrim's encouragement in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it'd be great. A couple quick questions here at the end for you, Jamie. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
uh, Honestly, I would want to sit him down and say probably two things. It's not your fault, and you are loved. If he could have known that, he would have saved himself and a lot of other people pain. If I ever get the chance to talk to him, that'll be what I say.
Good. That's good. Or you could have Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting say, "It's not your
I
fault." Over
totally
and
am
over.
picturing that as I say it, and I'm weeping. I'm weeping. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's great. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Oh, interesting. I am watching this fascinating series. This is kind of deep cut. I don't know if folks are familiar with the streaming service Mubi, but there is a series on there called Mussolini, Son of the Century.
Yeah. I've heard such great things.
Astounding, aesthetically, politically, artistic. I mean, it is just an incredible adventure in seeing history, I think, really through this like charged spiritual lens in many ways. And yet it feels so disconcertingly contemporary. I just can't say enough about it. I have to find some excuse to write about it.
Amazing. Awesome. I'm excited. I've heard so many good things about it. I need
It's
to go
really
check it
worth
out.
the time.
I need to spend some money on Mubi and go check it out.
There's a 30-day free trial, so you can start that way. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Well, there's one. I don't know if you have a couple minutes for one last question that
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you that I didn't get to, but for you, what does philosophy look like now as opposed to what it looked like before?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Having come through this journey now in sort of mid-career, middle life, I'm like just so jazzed by philosophy again. I feel like I'm a student again, but I think it's because I'm realizing, oh, philosophy isn't just about winning the argument. It's about this venture in wisdom, and it's about how to live. And I think I'm newly fascinated by philosophy that seems impenetrable to me. I'm hugely absorbed by Hegel right now, 19th century German philosopher, who's notoriously opaque and difficult. But somehow, like those art experiences, I'm just finding if I can spend time with him, he repays a sort of wisdom that actually pays off for my students. Like, how should we be living right now? And so I'm really energized by philosophy in that way again.
Amazing. That's so good. Well, Make Your Home in This Luminous Dark will be available March 24th, anywhere books are sold. It's a fantastic book. And I think if people can get it, can read it, and then start to live these practices and go on this journey, we're going to get to a much better world so that we could actually let go of the certainty. We could surrender to God, that we could actually encounter fear but then the perfect love that then drives out that fear. And we say no longer, and we just like be absorbed with the love of God. And it would be fantastic. It would be good. Jamie, anywhere that you'd like to point people to, how could they connect with you or what you're doing in your work?
I'm at jameskasmith.com. And if you go there, you can find, I have a Substack. I'm on a bit of a tour, nothing in Kansas City, but right now, but if I might be in neighborhoods where some of your listeners are, so would love to meet readers. Thanks so much for your close reading of it and really grasping the book. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you so much. It was deep. I know a lot of people probably got a lot out of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Joshua.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out. Share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.